I am Mary Sketch with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition, and I am for the soil to protect the landscapes, waterways, and resources that provide the food that we all eat and the lands that we recreate on for current and future generations.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee, and before we get to our episode today, I would like to remind you of one of our recent posts on the website, forthesoil.org, and that is the digit for thesoil.org, and it's reminding everyone of a relatively new resource. It's a new book published in 2022 called Resilient Agriculture: Cultivating Food Systems for a Changing Climate. That is one of our resources available on our website. And once again, that is at forthesoil.org. Now, to this episode. Welcome, everyone, to For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee, and joining me are my co-host, Dr. Eric Bendfeldt with Virginia Cooperative Extension Community Viability, Mary Sketch Bryant, who normally co-hosts the program. She's working in the field this week out at a conference, I believe, so she will be joining us in the next episode. But filling in for her is Sarah Koth, who is very active in the For the Soil Coalition and also the website, blog posts. Sarah does a lot with the For the Soil effort. And Sarah, I know we have a special guest that you'd like to introduce.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. And we are excited and honored to have Kathy Yoder on the in our conversation today. And Kathy is based in Harrisonburg, Virginia. She's the Education Outreach Program Director at Vine and Fig New Community Project. And Kathy, if you would like to introduce yourself more, I'll hand it to you.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. It's so great to be here with you because I know we worked at Vine and Fig together for a little bit. And so thank you for having me on the podcast. So yes, New Community Project, which we call NCP, is a small nonprofit that started back in 2004 by Director David Ratcliffe. And today we have two sustainable living centers, one in Harrisonburg and one in Vermont. And the one is in Starksville, Vermont. So Harrisonburg site is at 715 North Main Street, close to the Little Grill. So that restaurant just reopened again, and we're very close to Little Grill and our community place. We're not our community place, but we are close to those two organizations. Many of you know Tom Benevento, who is our Vine and Fig coordinator there on that site. So I am the Educational Outreach Program Director there. And we focus a lot on different projects. So Sarah, I don't know, like if you would like me to start off on some projects or if you have some questions.
Yeah, we'd love to learn more. We know there's a lot that goes along with Vine and Fig, and you all work in many different parts of the community, and it's all very related to soil health, and that's so exciting to see. And we'd love to, I guess, start with one of your main programs is talking about food access. And how that relates to soil health. So if you could tell us a little bit more about those projects.
Yeah, we're super excited. This is our second year with a grant we received from VDACS, and that is Virginia Department of now I can't, Consumer Services. I can't think of what the A stands for, but so we got a grant from them. And what we are doing with that grant is working with organizations who've already identified food insecure or marginalized populations who are food insecure. So what we decided to do is, I have an educational background. For many years, I've been in education. And so at Vine and Fig, at the Sustainable Living Center, we didn't have that piece yet. So I joined on with Tom Benevento for that. And so when we started this grant, we were working very closely with Radical Roots Farm. And it was during COVID, during 2020, and we provided vegetables for curbside meal program for Harrisonburg Public Schools. And so we would drop off that food, they would distribute it. And so it was actually harvested that day, and it was on the table, could be on the table of those families that night, which is amazing because those highly nutritional veggies could be consumed within, 15 hours of 15 hours from being harvested. So that it was just amazing. Plus, it also is where the families are. The families come to the curbside, receiving those veggies and those meals that Harrisonburg was distributing. And then and it was in a bag, usually of 7 to 8 vegetables. And then we provided some educational pieces in there. And so, about Harrisonburg being very diverse and, having 70 different languages spoken in the school system. Children often know 3 languages. That's the norm. And so our educational piece really wanted to show that representation. And so we are working with interpreters and translators that are it's Spanish, Kurdish, and Arabic. And so what we do with our recipes that we feature. So we're taking like the farm to school. So you might have heard those terms, farm to school. And that is, just getting local, providing food localization, meaning supporting those farmers, supporting those farmers' families. And also we really look at how they farm. So the people that we work with really replenish that soil and provide habitat for pollinators around around the perimeters. And so when, so I might get it like a little bit off topic here. So yeah, help me, Sarah.
I've got a question, if I may. I've been reading about some of your work with the Vine and Fig educational outreach program. You've got a great website, by the way, and for our listeners, that web address is vinefigeducation.org. That's vinefigeducation.org. It's obvious you're working with a lot of young people, a lot of elementary age kids. What should kids know about soil health?
So that is important. So healthy soil means healthy plants. That means healthy people and a healthy planet. And so getting kids connected with those critters that are in the soil. So identifying that, just like you can you can tell how there are organisms in the water that tell you that the water is high quality. Well, in compost, you can do the same. And so like in compost, the black soldier fly, that larva, if you see that larva in the compost, then you know that it's a good thing. And so the kids being connected to composting, like showing them how to replenish the soil for free. You don't have to, buy compost. You can make it yourself by taking what would other be trash that goes to the landfill. So that's what we try to teach kids, is that throw that banana peel into a bin, cover it with some leaves or sawdust, and then put some more food on top, maybe stir it every once in a while. And then you're gonna, in 6 months to a year, you're gonna have some really good stuff you can put onto your garden beds to grow some healthy plants.
And Kathy, I think a lot of us are sort of disconnected from food and farming. As you've interacted with the students and children, have you have a story of like an aha moment that maybe a child had or student had? It's from planting to composting.
Yeah, so I was just at back in April. I was just back into the at Smithland Elementary School, and they were talking about composting there. We were in their garden, and one of the girls said that, hey, you should see our experiment that we're doing with soil back in the classroom, because I was there teaching about composting. And so we were talking about, first we talk about why have healthy soil, and that lettuce, a head of lettuce that a lot of us leave in our refrigerators or we don't store correctly, start to go bad. And where do we put that? Does it go into the landfill, where it takes almost up to 25 years, depending on the landfill, to decompose? A lot of people don't understand that. And so when people hear that, usually that it can take up to 25 years for it to decompose, they're like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. Why is that? It's because those organisms don't have air. So anyway, then she took us in to her classroom and we got to see that experiment. And they were taking, clay soil, Virginia clay soil, and trying to grow bean sprouts. And then they were taking all the way up to humus. And so we were talking about compost and humus. And it was really like a full circle moment because we were out in the garden and talking about composting. They were visiting the organisms. They were holding the red wigglers. They were seeing how some food was decomposing, food scraps, and then they were seeing their compost system there at their school where they're starting to compost.
It's amazing. And it sounds like you do this with a few different schools. Is that right?
Yeah, so we're throughout, we have support through Harrisonburg Public Schools to provide this compost education. Through Mennonite Carpenters Guild, we build 2 3-bin compost systems at schools. And that was a wonderful summer, last summer. That's where they built 3-bin compost systems that were based on DC Park and Rec. They had compost systems. They don't have the agriculture space to compost curbside. So what they do is provide these compost bins. I think there's, I think it's like 30 or so. There might be more like 50 now. It depends all the time. But there are these neighborhoods that have these 3-bin composting systems. And through the composting systems, they've learned that to keep it critter proof, like, you don't want to have rats or mice, and along stream beds, you can get a lot of those. So we wanted to have that experience for the elementary students where they don't have to think about, oh my goodness, I see a mouse in the compost or whatever, but it's a critter proof, high capacity system. And so, and so they're using that now at Waterman and at Bluestone Elementary School. And we're working with Harrisonburg City Schools. They said yes to this. We're working with them to install these systems, but really I want kids to lead the way to Harrisonburg composting in neighborhoods. And so this is an example, and there's artwork put on these bins. It's a beautiful
We're talking
system.
today with Kathy Yoder, Director of Educational Outreach Program for an organization called Vine and Fig. And I see you have another website, vinefignCP.org. And scrolling through these websites, I'm seeing a lot of content, a lot of resources, Kathy. There's discussion about gray water recycling, about permaculture, and one that caught my attention, edible landscaping. When kids first learn the concept that you can eat landscape plants, blueberries and so forth, what's the reaction you hear from kids?
Well, we were at one of the elementary schools and they had edible landscaping there, and they had no idea that I think it was the serviceberry. So the serviceberry trees were right there, and they had no idea. And the birds don't know it's there either yet. So as we were teaching about composting and growing healthy things in healthy soil, it was almost like a flock of birds that came and started eating from those. And it was really quite amazing. You do always have to talk about, are there any children who are diabetic? You have to think about whether or not they have access to those. So you talking with the principals, and they know, just teaching kids, it's a real life experience about, hey, you can't just go and eat any kind of berry, and what kind of berries are safe, and you never eat berries unless you're with an adult who can identify and they know, so it's all those safety kinds of things. But it was a beautiful moment for them to realize that, hey, right there by the cafeteria are these beautiful, they have a beautiful place to sit outside outside on their patio. And this is right there. So it was planted on purpose there. So it's really beautiful.
Kathy, one of the principles that we've been emphasizing with For the Soil is the idea of energizing with diversity. And what you say is really interesting, growing a multitude of plants and having an integrated permaculture system. If you want to speak a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we learn a lot from our Jubilee Climate Farm, which Tom Benevento and many different people, Irma and Mari Cruz, help with that. And we teach about cover cropping too, replenishing the soil. So raised beds are often what are at schools. And so when we're at school gardens, we try to teach about using cover crops and trying to use, those crops that replenish the soil, and then you can plant in them. And then they are almost like they are the ground cover, and then you just carve out that hole to plant that next plant in, or that tomato plant, like using clover at the base. And so we're learning more and more through Jubilee Climate Farm. Tom is always helping me with, knowing things, how to take it to another level in the school garden. But what we try to do is like that, teach about composting, water collection, permaculture practices, creating a community with the school community, getting them involved, and of course the growing of fruits and vegetables, where food comes from and how it grows. So,
Kathy, just a couple of minutes remaining in this episode of For the Soil, a Conversation, and I wanted to wrap it up by asking a question about who inspired you to do what you do. When you were in high school, did you ever envision that you would be director of educational outreach programs for a sustainable agriculture organization and community organization? What led you to where you are now?
So I grew up, Mennonite, and I have lots of Amish relatives. And so there are many connections I make all the time to what I did growing up. My mom had a huge patch and a huge garden. And so I was always connected very much to the food that we ate and how to grow it. And so then when I went to high school, I never really thought I was going to go to college. And I was a first generation high school graduate, a first generation college graduate, and a first generation getting my graduate degree and master's in education. So yeah, I really didn't think that because, coming from more of a conservative Mennonite background, getting that kind of education really inspired me. And then I always had every location I was at, whether I was teaching a grade level. So I have education I've taught for 8 years in school systems. And then I also I homeschooled my kids for a little bit. And then we also traveled quite a bit when I was teaching our kids. And then we also had this time where I was at a private elementary school, also where we went out to farms and we collected the produce and we brought it back and we cooked with it every day. That was very inspirational. And so taking all those experiences, I always saw these places that I wanted to create. And when I went to Waterman Elementary School, and the composting project landed on my lap. And because there was lumber in the hallway for a composting project that wasn't off the ground, that was pretty amazing. So then we got composting going school-wide for 2.5 years. And so that there, I thank them for that opportunity to get that composting project going.
Very interesting background. I want to thank you for joining us, and I hope that you'll stay with us for a part 2 episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. We've been talking with Kathy Yoder, Director of Educational Outreach Program at an organization called Vine and Fig. And once again, that web address, vinefigeducation.org, and also vinefignCP.org. Kathy, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
And Eric and Sarah, we'll catch you in the next one.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy.
For the Soil, a Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee.